I am not too worried on whether it's a politically binding agreement right now or a legally binding one. I think that's not really the issue. The question is, do we have the political will to do what needs to be done? And I think the issue really is that it is doable, provided there is political will, and it does not involve a fundamental change of lifestyles as is being discussed. Yes, there are issues, but let's look at it this way. Energy prices in terms of oil prices went up by 4 to 5 times last year or a year before that. That did lead to collapse of the civilization. So why should electricity prices, if it rises by 4 times over the next 10, 15 years, lead to global collapse or change of lifestyles? I don't really understand this. I think we are making it much bigger problem than it is because we do not want to take political decisions that need to be taken right now. And that we could do if there is a financial crisis or a financial meltdown, but when it comes to something called the global commons, then countries are not willing to ante up. And that's, I think, the key problem. It's a competitive issue between countries that is stopping action, not the quantum of action that needs to be done.
And it's fascinating. You're making that point about countries being inherently selfish. Jacques in the US says exactly the same thing. Every government will try to minimize what it has to do while passing the burden to others. Now, Anna Chen, you're here to talk about Chinese issues. You wanted to pick up on that?
Well, first of all, I'm wondering how Barack Obama is going to get any agreement past Congress, because it's wonderful now that we've had a change of administration and the Americans are no longer being obstructive. But I can't see how that's going to happen. And also, you still have a situation where, as I think Prabir pointed out, America is emitting 5 times what each Chinese individual is emitting in carbon emissions, and come 2030, it's still going to be twice what the Chinese are emitting per capita.
Although it's interesting to see a minister from the Chinese government saying that the Chinese emissions may peak between 2030 and 2040, a little later than some people wanted. Now, Anna, you wanted to talk about China. Let's bring in Sheetal, who's got a quick point on just that country.
And maybe Anna wants to respond to this, actually. Alex in Boston says it's a useless exercise. Nothing will happen, as China will do nothing except empty talk about compromise.
Well, Hu Jintao did make this statement in September, saying that there is a policy change and they've acknowledged there is this problem, because you only have to go into any Chinese city and breathe the air to know that there is a very, very real problem. They're expected to be charging households, for example, $64 per year towards this $30 billion cost of meeting their climate change targets. And they're going to be planting a forested area the size of Norway. They want 15% of their energy from renewables, in a short time. So at least they want to, but we're obviously going to see and have to keep putting pressure on to make sure they keep this up.
I'd like to hear, Daniel, you respond to that. Are you convinced that the Chinese are committed enough and going to do enough to tackle climate change?
Well, the reality is that China has been acting. China has been, as just was mentioned, very proactive in pushing renewables energy, while the US was still in the Bush dark ages and was not willing to act federally at all. There is an issue about implementation. There is an issue there, as well as in Germany, about the massive dependency on coal, the least efficient of all fuels. But China is, in fact, acting. And we're not going to get anywhere in Copenhagen if the media continues to portray this as it's China versus the US, and China is the dirty guy that's not doing anything. Let's remember, coming back to the personal consumption issue, that 1/3 of the emissions from China are actually about Western consumption. It's because we buy these goods over here that these emissions exist.
And Daniel,
so it's a little unfair to charge them on the Chinese alone.
And that point was the first comment I read out on today's World Have You Say from Syed in France, saying exactly the same thing. If we keep buying these things, Chinese factories will keep producing them, was his point. Let's bring in another guest here. Isaac Muara is an independent development consultant. He's live with us from Nairobi. I was just looking at the news before I came into the studio. The AU representation, the African Union representation in Copenhagen, has threatened to walk out because they don't believe they're getting enough financial assistance to make the changes being asked of them. Isaac, do you have some sympathy with this African anger in Copenhagen?
I think for me, I am very surprised that people would expect any form of agreement in Copenhagen, because most of the time what would happen, you find that there will be some prevalence of trade And as long as it is trade which seems to benefit, I think issues of climate will be relegated to the periphery. So in my opinion, I think states will only produce a paper, but they will not be willing to go ahead and implement. If you also look at the issue of carbon trading and also compensation, the great question would be, if, for example, today countries of the South are actually compensated for the climatic change, then what would those monies go to? And you will find that they would also be counterproductive because the engagement in which we will find this money is being channeled to would also continue producing those carbon effects and climatic change. So I think for me, states are being dishonest, and the best way to actually mitigate climatic change would also be fundamentally to ensure that there is actually equitability in terms of trade.
Meg, in Copenhagen, speak to Isaac. He's concerned that really this isn't an equitable approach and that the developing world will be asked to change but won't be compensated. Why should he not worry?
Because there's time yet. The world is decided here at these negotiations in minutes, and there are 2 weeks yet to go. So we don't know yet where we will be 2 weeks from now. That said, he is correct. Right now, there is a proposal on the table that developed countries will put forward some 10 billion to the developing world. That's a pittance, especially compared to back commitments. Looking forward, up till 2020, we need to see somewhere on the order of 150 billion US dollars now to nearly 200 US billion dollars by 2020 from the developed world to developing countries to help them adapt to the unavoidable impacts of climate change, to leapfrog to clean energy economies, and to protect tropical forests.
And the issue is, and we've talked about it.
So there's a very long way to go.
The issue is, though, we've talked about this on World Have Your Say's edition on the radio, is whether people are prepared to foot those kind of bills at a time when they've just spent a great deal of money on various bailout packages. And if you're watching and want to email, it's worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com. Kenneth in Kampala's got in touch saying, Monday, the 7th of December, it's such a great day for the world. I call it a turning point, so there's some optimism from Africa. Let's bring in a caller now. And by the way, you can get all of our numbers, our Twitter details, Flickr and so on from the blog, worldhaveyoursay.com. But let's bring in a caller now in Norway. Inga's with us. Hi, Inga. What would you like to say?
Well, from my point of view, it is very important that we try to do something very quickly. And I would like that electric power should be based on renewable energy. And I live in a rural area, and maybe I'm a little selfish, but I think we still have to use fossil fuel for transportation. And I do hope that science will be pushed forward.
So you're hoping that science can affect the energy that we consume. But Inga, one of the reasons we got in touch with you is because you posted about your personal experience. Just tell us how climate change you feel is affecting your life.
Yes, I am living in the middle of the Jostedal Glacier National Park, more or less, and here we see well, let's say the glacier is a very obvious climate indicator, and especially last 10 years, the glacier has been decreasing rather rapidly.